then my living shall not be in vain. No, my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. Good morning, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I want to first thank my friend of several years, President David, and my new friend Lindsay, and Dr. Kane for those, and my introducer. Thank you. Give them a hand this morning. Give them a hand. So folks, I start with that song because it was sung at the funeral of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King by Mahalia Jackson. And I remember the funeral of Dr. King. I was just a child. And I remember that day that he was assassinated because my teachers were crying in school. And I remember very clearly wondering what that was about. And I share with folks that I don't know if on that day it was the spirit of Dr. King came alive in me or the spirit of Dr. King entered me, but this work that we are in here in the Faith in Action Project is what he was about. And so I am grateful to be standing on the shoulders of those who have gone before me. I recognize that I did not get here on my own. I am grateful in that introduction that they shared that I am not deterred by resistance because there's been no culture change without it. And so I want to again go back and thank Dr. Kane for the things that she shared that gives us a sense of what's the current state, right? It gives us information about where we are. And some of that information might be new to some of you. Some of you is like, duh, right? Yep. That is not information we did not know. And as we are in this 8th anniversary, again, the number 8 being about new beginnings, right? And so the next round of the work, what is it that we need to do to move the needle in 2024? I want to start, first slide, please, with honoring. I want to give a hand to the tech folks who are managing stuff for us in the background, taking care of things. Thank you so much. You don't see them, but they're making it happen for us and keeping us sounding good and moving our stuff along. I want to start with the land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge the land that I join you from is the original and ancestral lands of the Piscataway Conoy tribal nations in the Baltimore, Washington area, and the lands that we are on here in Marion County in Indianapolis. I start with that because I invite us to recognize that today, land acknowledgements have become a best practice. It's what we do in spaces like this. We're in danger, however, of that becoming performative and simply being the thing you do and not doing the work to honor the land, the legacy, the people, the current day dynamics that are still very real for our indigenous siblings. And so I start there because it also invites us into, as Dr. Kane was showing, all of those statistics, all of that information, we did not just arrive here. Amen. It's about something. It's about a history, it's about a legacy of harm. And if we won't own past harm, we can't move effectively into the future. And so I start by honoring the land and the labor of Native and Indigenous folks, and I also honor the labor of Black and brown folks, that many of whom helped to build these organizations and institutions but did not have access to them. And so I honor my grandmother and my grandfather who labored so that I could be in a space to stand on a stage to have this conversation today. I invite you to be present with those who made it possible for you to be in the space today. We take a deep breath and we breathe those in together. As we start our time together today, it's always dangerous to give a Black preacher time limits, right? And so I didn't come today to preach at you, but I did come. I was charged by Lindsay to get us going. We got Dr. Kane that started us, and we're going to have a wonderful panel with some more information around how some of this stuff plays out. And my charge is this morning to get you fired up about making change, how we move forward, what's in the way of our moving forward. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so what I want to do is deepen the level of real talk and engagement when it relates to economic justice and racism. I want to go real. So how many of us know we've been in a place where we've been honest, but we didn't say everything? I like that blouse. I wouldn't wear that skirt. No, I didn't lie, but I didn't say everything. How many of you know that sometimes these conversations can be the I like that blouse conversation? We just stay right here. Today, folks, in order for us to move the needle, in order for us to change the stats that Dr. Kane was talking about, we've got to get more and more into the I wouldn't wear with that skirt conversation. We've got to move the conversation to a deeper level of authenticity, right? I'm inviting us into what I often will say is, I'm inviting us into the conversation that happens in the meeting after the meeting. How many of you have been to a meeting after the meeting? Right? If your hand didn't go up, you probably called the meeting, right? That's been my experience, right? And so what I'm talking about today, folks, is we need to do the work in order. We can't create change if we're not able to talk about it. If you're not able. So if you've left a space saying, I wish I had said, right, then you are not being able to move as effectively. Is that making sense? So I want us today, again, as we talk about tools and actions, I want you leaving having done some work, having thought about what are the things that I need to move the needle, to consider the importance of context before content as we put our faith into action. Folks, one of the challenges right now is we're trying to do cookie cutter approaches. We go one place, we hear something, we're like, okay, so let's try that over here, without considering the context. What's informing the context of that space that's different than this space? So that when I step to speak in that space, I get heard in this way, or you get heard in this way. Maybe you shouldn't be the one to speak. Maybe somebody else should be the one to speak. In this context before content, right? That's what I want to invite us into today. To consider the skills and the tools that are needed to engage faith in action in order to mitigate poverty. And what are some tools? What's one thing? And so I don't pretend in this next 35 minutes or so as we're engaging that you're going to be able to use or take everything. I want you to figure out what's the thing you need, right, to just move to the next level. I appreciate, again, as Dr. Kane invited us to volunteer, to think about what's my part, and to not have my part have to be your part. I need to say that again. Because part of what has already been shared is we need all of us, and we don't need all of us doing the same thing. Because making signs might be your ministry. It's not mine, right? Speaking in front of people might be yours. It's not mine, right? Am I making sense? Talking to children might be yours, but not mine. So I want us to be clear, again, as we move in to what's the tools, what's the capacity building that I need, and then to offer a framework to address poverty and racism for the next round. And I like to engage as I approach my 40th year professionally doing this work. And yes, I was 2 when I started. But as I approach this time frame, what I like to remind us of is this work didn't start with us, and it won't end with us. Right? And so the work we were needing to do in the 1980s was not the work we needed to do in the 1990s. And the work that we needed to do in the 90s was not the work we needed to do in 2000. Am I making sense? And so what I'm inviting us into, what's the work for the next round? And that's where, so all of us who have been at this for a minute, don't get stuck in, well, I learned in the 60s. Important. And it might not be as useful in 2024. And that's what we have to be open to, being able to hold. Make sense? Next thing, what I want to ground, next slide please. What I want to ground us in this morning as we move into our time together is, what I appreciate that's been named is what I often assume as people show up in a room, that this is true. I assume I believe this about people. So I believe in this space that you care about yourself. I need you to start there, because the ability to care for others really does start with some self-love. And so I want to start that you care about yourself, your communities, and respect the humanity of all of the divines of all of God's creation. I believe that about you in the room. If it's not true, don't tell me. I also believe that you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and that you should have your basic needs met, to include but not limited to food, shelter, a living wage, health care, access to education, to improve your status in life. And I believe that you want that for others. Just let that sit. Just let that sit. So it's like, yeah, oh, okay, that's true. That's true. That's true for me. Thus, that's my preacher part. Thus, if you learn that you are behaving or being experienced in a way that is out of alignment with this belief, that you will commit to engaging, exploring, and examining your behaviors, your attitudes, and your assumptions, that you will consider feedback from others with humility and curiosity, and a commitment to putting your faith into action in order to create a more inclusive and beloved community. Now, I want us to sit with that on purpose, because if this is not true for you, none of what happens today will matter. It will just be that you came. Because in order to move the needle, we have to be willing to get clear that this is not a valueless proposition. This is a value conversation. And if you are having conversations with folks who don't share this value, you are going to miss or bump. Is that making sense? All of God's creation, all of humanity, and willing to hear and receive feedback when I'm not showing up in alignment with that belief, right? And so I want you to not waste energy when you are running into folks who don't have this as a shared value. I'm not saying not to engage, but get clear, we are coming from a very different value place. If I don't see the people who are living in poverty as a part of God's creation and humanity that are deserving of all the things, it doesn't matter what the statistics say. I have to be in place where I believe and agree with that. Is that all right? And so I'm operating today from that belief. Now, I've shared this belief statement in spaces, and I've had one woman raise her hand and say, Jamie, I believe you believe that. But I don't believe that about the people in this room. And so, my next statement then is, do you think she's talking about you? which then gives you an opportunity to do some self-assessment and reflection. How have I shown up in the work and in the world that would have people not believe that I care about myself, that I care about others, all of God's creation, that I believe everyone is deserving of these things, and that I'm willing to receive feedback when I'm not showing up in a way that's in alignment with that? How have I shown up where that's been a disconnect? Does that make sense to you? Is that making sense? That's where I want us to start this morning. And so here's how I want us to move into our time. I'm going to invite you to just take a deep breath with me. Next slide, please. And I want to introduce breathing as a main tool for today. How many of you, as you listened to Dr. Kane, had to take a deep breath? It's like, whew, whew. Breathing saves the day. How many of you have been in a space where, had I not taken a deep breath, it might not have gone so well? I want you to hold breathing as a tool. And in this space, for this day, for this work, breathing allows you to get connected to what your intentions are in your next statement. And so, do I intend to bring people along? Do I intend for people to see why this matters to me? Or do I intend to make them wrong? All right. Do I intend to have them feel like I know better than them? You're making a point, Doc. So what's my intentions in my next statement? Say that. And so that's what I want to invite us into as we move our faith into action. Lindsay already started by inviting us to be in community together this morning. So as you look around the room, how many of you have been in places and you know that part of navigating this work is barriers, structural barriers, systemic barriers? Well, part of navigating, having you all in conversation today, is physical barriers. It's not easy to move about in this space. Watch them steps. Right? However, I do want you to take the next 2 minutes, look around, say hello to 2 or 3 people. You don't have to do a whole lot of movement because it's kind of hard. But say hello to 2 or 3 people that you don't know. And then, because I am going to invite us into a quick conversation, partner up with someone that you might not have known when you came in the room. So it might mean doing a little bit of shifting, but we want to connect as a community. Again, one of our goals of this space is connection. So say hello to 2 or 3 people, and then maybe sit next to someone you didn't know. You might already be doing that, so you don't have to do a whole lot of movement. But we want you to do that connection. You got 3 minutes, go. About another minute and find someone to sit and talk with. Find someone to sit and talk with. 4, 3, 2, 1. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Yes, just fine. Just be sitting next to somebody. You're going to have a conversation in just a few moments. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. How we doing? Excellent. Thank you so much. Again, folks, we have the gift of this Faith in Action experience coming together, and it's so important that we recognize who's in this with us, that we're in community with others, right? That we are making connections. And so sometimes we just come and we sit and we wave high and night, but you have to be intentional about building relationships and collaboration. You have to be intentional about that. So I want to try to create a couple of opportunities for that this morning. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here's where you're going to go. For the next few minutes with somebody next to you, right, you're just going to have a quick conversation. The first one is, so introduce yourself. And I'm not necessarily your roles and your positions, but you can. But you might want to just name, I'm a new grandmother, right? That's why I want you to know me today. You might want to name that, I just rang the bell as a breast cancer survivor, right? My sister just celebrated 5 years. And so that's what, yes, right. You might want to name that your partner's ill and you're here, but you're there, right? So folks, what I'm trying to invite us into is the importance of presence. We have got to get present if we are going to do this work effectively. Is that okay? So, say whatever you want to say. Just introduce yourself in that way. You do also get to share your roles, your pronouns, and all of those things. Please feel free to do that. The next thing then is, what's got your head space and your heart space? So again, we got wonderful grounding information from Dr. Kane. How many of us are sitting with this particular piece around healthcare? Or I hadn't thought about mental health and the impact of that. Or I hadn't thought about how it matters when you own your space versus renting your space, right? I hadn't thought about that and what the stats actually are like here in Marion County. I hadn't thought about. How many of you are at your first this experience for the first time? First timers. Yay, welcome first timers. First timers. How many of us have been at least 3 of these? Anybody been at least 3 of these? Yes, wonderful. Right. Who's been at all of them? Anybody been at all of them? Okay, excellent, right. So I want you all thinking about, what have I done since the last one? Y'all know I'm a pastor. I preach every Sunday. Why are you talking to me when I preached about that last Sunday? Did you do anything with what you got from the last one? That's where I want us to be, right? So what's got your headspace right? So where you're going then is, what do you see as you do your work and your ministry that makes this necessary? What did you come here for today? Right? And so we've got the stats, we've got the information. There's not a question. We don't have to be convinced that this is an issue. What do you see in your day-to-day that has this matter? I'm inviting you now into context in the work that you do that has this matter. Now, maybe some of you were sent, right? And so I just came because they told me I had to go to this. If that's your truth, you need to speak that in order to get to the place where you can know the work you need to do to have this matter. Am I making sense, folks? Are you getting me? So you're going to have about 3 or 4 minutes, not a long time, to just go through those questions and any particular hopes you're hoping that will come out of today. Does that feel good? Good? Go for it. Have a conversation. 2 minutes. One minute. Four, three, two, one. All right, let's begin to wrap our comments. Focus back this way. Focus back this way. Look, give your partner a fist bump or a high five. High five or fist bump. High fives in the room. Whatever feels, appreciate them. Right for the conversation. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, thank you very much. All right. So how many of you could have kept talking? How many of you could have kept talking? Yes, that's the intention. We want you to keep doing that work, right? So that we get to solutions, next steps. What do we get to do, right? Based upon what we're sharing. Thank you for that. Folks, I wanted to name, as I move through this, everything that I'm doing in this 45 minutes is intentional. I'm not trying to fill time. I'm a black preacher. I can fill 45 minutes like that. That is not a thing for me. What I'm inviting you to do is to develop your leadership voice. So often in spaces like this, I experience people who care. So I care. Ain't it awful? That shouldn't be the case, right? I'm not going to do that. But I don't show up with the capacity to lead and make change. And that happens as you develop your voice in the conversation. Is that making sense to you? Right, that's what I need us to do. Now, I was working with a group of students at one point, and at the end of the session, this student came up to me and he said, well, Jamie, how do I develop my leadership voice? How do I do that? And what I said to him was, pay attention to when you lose your voice. In what space do you go silent? In whose community, in who's at the table, in what situation do you not speak your truth? Start working there. And that's how you develop your voice. Is that making sense? Are you getting that? Right? I want to thank you for engaging in that way. Part of the other thing I want to offer in this moment, how many of us know that as we hear the stats, as we look around the situations that are going on, not just in Marion County, but all over the world, around poverty and systemic racism and all of the other oppressions. How many of you know that can be an energy drainer? It's just draining. Like, I'm just tired. Like it. For those who have been at it and been in the fight for a long time, have used their voice in many ways and see things, I'm just tired. You know, just compassion fatigue, battle fatigue, just worn out. And so what I'm inviting into the room is energy. Your energy matters. And sometimes when you don't have it, you need others to have it for you. Right? And so, give a fist bump and a high five to the person you was talking to. So I want you, just wherever you see these people, anywhere in the world, give them a fist bump, give them a high five, so that you draw on the energy that's needed to be in this work. How many folks know that there are energy givers and energy drainers? And if every time you walk into the room, people is like, ain't she on vacation? I thought he quit. Then you're not life-giving. You're not giving energy as you go into the space. I'm not saying that from a blame place. I'm saying it from a place of paying attention to how it impacts the work that we are trying to do. That folks need to see you come in with some energy for change, right? And that energy involves a lot of things, but I do want to focus on the importance of energy. And so with those things named, we're not going to have time to go over, to debrief all of this, but I want you stirred up in the space of where's your head and heart? What do you see as you move about your own ministries and your own agencies and your own self in this work that makes this necessary? So I'm working with my staff, or I'm working with this volunteer group, or I'm working with this project at my church, or these are the things that I see that make this necessary. And in this space, I want you to pay attention to, and how are we doing? Right? How are we doing? Right? And as we do that, it is important for us to pay attention to a couple of things. Next slide, please. So I'm going to offer you several tools over the next 10 minutes. Please feel free to take pictures of the slide, but these slides will also be on the Faith in Action website. Right? I'm sharing this information. It doesn't do me any good to just keep it. Right? I need you to be able to say that I started doing this stuff. So that next year when we come back, we get to have used some tools to have moved the needle. That makes sense to you? That's where we're going. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is how we be in the conversation. So these 4 agreements by Glenn Singleton. Glenn and I got to spend some time together last week in Tulsa at Black Wall Street. And how many of you know Black Wall Street? Yeah, number of us in the room. If you don't, no judgment, good stuff to look up. That talks about, reminds us that we didn't just wake up here, right? There's a history that has us in the spaces that we are of poverty, right? That has us in the spaces of where we are around systemic racism. So I want you to repeat these 4 after me. Say them with me. Stay engaged. Stay engaged. Experience discomfort. Speak your truth. Expect and accept non-closure. I love it, Virginia. I love it. So that's where I actually want us to be. I want us to be in like this one works for me. This one I'm not sure about, and so on. Just be where you are, wherever. But I just want to offer that one of the tensions is that we can't be in conversation. And in order for us to do that, we have to first stay engaged. How many of us know when we're not engaged? You can tell when I've disappeared. And COVID has allowed us to look engaged and not be engaged. How many of you spent the last several years in boxes, little boxes, right? And so nobody can really tell what was going on, right? It looks like I'm engaged in this thing. I don't have no pants on. You don't know what I'm doing. Right? Right? So I want you just to pay attention to when you're engaged and when you're not, right? And allow yourself to get in touch with, when do I disconnect? Who's talking? What's the conversation?
Watch out.
Right? What's that about? Well, why do I? And it could be, it might be about the content. It might be about the person. It might be you didn't have no food and you're tired. All of those are possibilities. But I want us, if we're to do this work, to pay attention to when you disengage. The second thing then there is experience discomfort. How many of you have ever had a moment in a meeting, in a situation, even as we got this data, and you could identify where the discomfort's coming from? It's like you felt it in your gut. So as a member of the group that has the least amount of, I feel some kind of way. Am I making sense? Yes, sir. Right? As a member of the group who keeps seeming to be doing better, I'm in the group that is at the top in every situation and so on. And so I feel something about it. So what I want to invite you to do is not just feel it, but experience the discomfort. Do the work around what that is about. I feel this as a. So what I'm inviting you into today, folks, as we do this faith and action work, we have to hold that our identities matter. Who you are, your social location matters in this discussion, right? So experience the discomfort. To speak your truth and allow your truth not to be the only truth in the room.
All right.
Yes, this is what's true for me, and I can hold that there are other truths in the space, and I can be engaged from that, right? And so what I'm inviting you to do is what we want to invite others to do, right? Because when I'm holding that my truth is all there is, and that's based upon what my experience is, right? Then we can't have conversations about movement. We can't look at what's next. Does that make sense to you? Right? So what speak my... And then finally, expect and accept non-closure. I appreciate Dr. Virginia said, I don't know about that last one. But what I found is folks can allow the need for closure to keep them from entering the work. Poverty, racism, sexism, it's all just too big. It's just too big. And I'm not going to say nothing about this in that meeting because it's just been that way too long and ain't nothing going to happen. So if I can't fix it in a sitcom, can't find a solution in 30 minutes, in 45 minutes, then I'm not even going to go there. And what I need the next generation of leaders to do for the next round is to accept and expect non-closure. We're going to need to put a comma in this conversation and come back to it. We got this far, but there's more work to be done. Is that landing? Yeah. Right? So stay engaged, experience discomfort, expect and accept non-closure. Next slide. Who's been in a room? Somebody has said something. What's your name, my friend? Mm-hmm. Bree? Yeah. So Bree says something. Whoops. That's a step. I told you all these steps is churches. Bree says something, and everybody goes like this. After the meeting, we come up to Bree and say, thanks so much for sharing that. That was very important. Who's been there? What am I offering you? While Bree might have appreciated in the moment you're coming up after the meeting saying to her, thank you, Bree, saying to her that that was an important comment, thank you for saying that. She might have appreciated that then. What did she feel in the moment? Right. Alone? Isolated? Vulnerable. Yeah, all the things, right? Are you getting me? All the things. That's what she's feeling in the moment. She might feel a little pissed, too. She might be a little pissed. Because she actually had a conversation with you before the meeting. we talked about this, what we was going to do when we got to this point. But when we got there, there were crickets. Folks are left alone. The next tool I want to offer you is the tool of joining. And that is not leaving people alone. This often happens for minoritized voices. They have waited and waited. They're sitting in the meeting and they're saying, I know somebody gonna say something about that. Like, who gonna say it? We having meetings in the meeting. Waiting to not have to be that person. Folks, you have to pay attention to when you leave folks alone. This faith and action work requires courage. So we have to step up and speak up. Even if we're not the first voice, don't leave folks alone. Is that landing? Right? Making sense for you? So what I was doing again this work a little bit ago, and a colleague of mine said, she says, Jamie, thank you for saying that, because I'm that person who said it in the meeting, and after the meeting, so when I said it in the meeting and then everybody looked like this, then I felt like I needed to say it again. But I said it louder. And then I became that person. And in that space, a young woman, one of her colleagues, a young white woman, this was a black woman who shared this, young white woman raised her hand and said to her, in that space, I was in that meeting, and I was in the conversation after the meeting about you being that person. And she just began to sob. Because what she was feeling, God acknowledged is real. And what I want to offer to you all in this space is the importance of recognizing the impact of leaving people alone. Good hearts and good intentions are not enough. You must be willing to join people in the conversation. Does that make sense? Now, the last thing I'll say about this as I'm moving in time is joining doesn't mean agreeing. So I can join Bree by saying, absolutely, thank you so much for saying that. That's what I'm dealing with. That's what's going on in my space. I could also join Bree by saying, I don't get it. Say more. That's still joining. Or, Bree, that's not my experience. Over here in our area, what we're doing, this is the thing that's happening. Did you see all three of those? All of those were joining. All of those were saying what you said mattered, and it deserves to be engaged. The skill that's needed so that we can continue to move the needle forward is reducing the need for the meeting after the meeting by joining folks and not leaving them alone. I often will say, it's simple, but it's not easy. They're just like, oh, well, that's a simple concept. But how many of us know we've seen it not happen? How many of us know we've been the person that's after the meeting wishing, oh, I wish I'd have said something. You know, I wonder what's going on for her. I wonder what's going on for them in that space, right? So it's important, again, as leaders, that we join. Next slide. I want to offer just a few more things. Go ahead, one more click, thank you. As we consider the change process, say these four with me. Awareness, knowledge, skills, action. Awareness, knowledge, skills, action. All right, most of us move through and are entering the work, and we find out, we enter from awareness. Oh my God, stats. That's awareness. We got notified that Marion County's got all these problems, and we go from awareness to action. Right? We jump from here to here. Right? And The problem with that is we miss critical capacity building work that has to happen in order for our actions to matter. That first part of awareness is, who are you in the conversation? What's been your experience? What's your relationship to the topic? What do you know about poverty? Right? Who are you in relationship with that's been in poverty? Right? How has your background around class and economic disparities, what do you know about that? So what's your own identity, right? And how does your race, your class, your gender, your sexual identities, how does that inform, all of this intersecting stuff, inform your awareness? What's the knowledge that you have? What do I know? Did I know the things that Dr. Kane was sharing? How do I make sense of this whole notion of what the barriers are and what the dynamics are that continue to help us to be in a space where poverty is manifested? What do I know about that? What's the information that I have? Do I understand? Or am I simply, again, not wrong, folks, hear me, not wrong, but not enough to move the needle? This is why we continue finding ourselves bumping and missing, finding ourselves here at the eighth at the eighth summit or at the eighth experience, and not really feeling like we've made a whole lot of progress around some of this. Is that making sense? Are you getting that, right? So what do I know? What's the information? What do I understand? What do I understand about the dynamics? What happens when folks come into the room across race and begin to talk poverty? Right? What goes on? Who goes silent? Whose voice gets heard? Whose perspectives get heard? Dr. Kane invited us into listening to other people's experience, all right? So what are the dynamics that are at play? And what you see there in knowledge is, what's the future? And that piece for me, folks, is the vision. If this were not a problem, in 5 years, I would see. In 3 years, we would see. By the fall, we would see. Are you getting me? So what's the vision that we have towards moving forward? I'm going to name some of that in the last final pivots. And then the skills are engaging skills. Listening, sharing, say vulnerability. Is a skill. Again, vulnerability is a skill. Humility, patience, and grace. These are the skills that are needed to move forward the work. Where do I get stuck? Do I have patience? Do I show up with grace? Do I show up with humility, or do I show up knowing everything all the time and no one feels like they can get a word in? Right? Am I willing to hold others' perspective? Am I willing to intervene, to be an ally, to show up in courageous behavior, and understand the importance of intent and impact, so that my actions then help to shift the status quo, mitigating poverty and systemic racism, creating greater equity and inclusion. Folks, I'm offering you this as a way to begin to think about, what do I know? What's my awareness? What's my knowledge? How's my skill? Right? So I've got some skill as I navigate with this group. I feel comfortable engaging with this group, but I don't feel comfortable engaging with this group. Are you getting that? So what do I need to do? Where do I need to do some of my work? You'll see that much of what I'm sharing with you is about tools to do the work, to be in the work, to get us to action. Let's move to the last 2 slides. Next, please. Next. Yep, good. Yep, go ahead. Click. Say with me, context. Before content. Context before content, folks. And so I really want you thinking about the context of your work before the content of poverty and systemic racism. What informs your context? Move to the next slide, please. You. Who am I? Who am I by race, class, gender, age, ability, position, sexual orientation, nationality? Who am I in this conversation? role level, right? So if I'm moving into the room and I'm trying to move the needle, well, you're the new manager. You're the new pastor. And we love the last one. And the last one didn't talk about this. And so I'm not sure about this. So maybe you don't need to introduce. Maybe you need to get somebody who has more social capital in that space to introduce. Is this landing? Making sense. Who am I? The next one is, who are we? Am I alone in this? Who's gone into a room and looked for other people? It's like, oh, I'm the only one. Right? So am I alone? Am I the first? Am I the only? Who's with me in the discussion? The environment and location. Becky and I were talking about the location that we're in. As we look at the news, that gives us information. What's the political environment? Right? What's the legal environment? What's going on in the location? What's the environment of the space that I am occupying? The next thing there is history, present, and future. What's the history of our being able to engage this? Who's been involved? Who's disappeared? Who was engaged last year but's not engaged this year? Why are they not engaged? Who's used to come to the meetings but don't come to the meetings anymore? What's the history? What's going on right now? One of the tensions of doing movement work is that we forget about the harm that we've done. With the best intentions, we've isolated communities. We've pushed people back. And then we show up trying to move forward without having done the work needed to repair and restore. So as you're moving forward, consider your context, emotional state, and literacy. You can't do this work with just cognitive knowing. What I appreciate about the information that Dr. King was sharing is that's intellectual and cognitive knowing. That's data. Do people have the capacity to hold that at the affective and emotional level? Are you able to engage what you feel when you see that? I was with another colleague who said, who was a senior diversity officer in a place, and in that space, she was talking about the feelings of some of the minoritized folks in the community. And her colleague, another vice president, says, well, we don't need a vice president for feelings. Emotional literacy is critical for us to be able to do this work. If you are not embodying this work, whole body, but just moving to action from an intellectual, cognitive place, you're going to find yourself missing and bumping. Time and timing, what's going on, what has just happened, power dynamics that are at play, and the quality of the engagement in the spaces that you're in. Folks, I know that I have shared a lot in this space, and I want to move to the last slide and just offer you these last points. One more. Back to. We're not going to get to do all of it. Back one more. Right, thank you. So, as you move into action, I invite you into the 4 pivots. Dr. Sean Jen Wright offers us reimagining justice by first reimagining ourselves. Reimagining justice by first reimagining ourselves. I want us to move from awareness, in our awareness, from lens to mirror. So not just looking out and seeing what's going on and what's the lens that in our analysis, but also to hold a mirror up to ourselves to see where we are in that discussion. Who am I in this discussion? So lens matters, data matters, analysis matters, but who am I? What am I meaning am I making in this space? The second one is connection. And we've talked about connection all morning. What's critical about connection is that you move from transactional to giving out turkeys, giving out clothes at one particular point in the year, to making sandwiches every other weekend, to move from transactional to transformational. which invites you into relationship with people. And not just the people you're serving, but the people who are also doing the serving, so that we understand what it is when we go into spaces. The third thing then being from problem to fixing to possibility creating. That's the vision place. And so again, for me, lots of the work I do with organizations today is about, where do you want to be? What would it look like if this work mattered? If we stay mired simply in the problem without having time to generate hope, vision, then we will forever be in this cycle. So this is where I want to be, right? I want to be 40 pounds lighter this time next year. That's the vision. Where am I now? I'm at this space. If that's to be achieved, what would I see in a year? Right? What would I see in 6 months? Am I making sense, folks? Are you getting me? So as you move from just the problem, analyzing the data, knowing what that is, to the vision, because without a vision, the people perish. And so what's our vision to shift the data that Dr. Kane shared with us? We know that it didn't start with us and it won't end with us, but what's the hope? What are we strategically visioning so that we can strategically plan to make a difference? And finally, presence. From hustle to flow. Stop doing so much. You need a list of this for the grant. You need a list of these. You got to have demonstrated you did this, and ain't none of it mattering. Just hustling. You tired? Your therapist is on speed dial. Your well-being. And so I'm not saying to not do anything. I'm just saying slow down. Flow into the work. Know that you matter in the work as much as the work matters. And for you as leaders, if you are not preparing to pass the baton, you are not leading. Not in this work. Because it didn't start with you and it won't end with you. But you can make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. We have time for 2 questions. I want to protect your break, and that's why, but I promise you that you can ask a question. So what we're going to do is go to Slido, and if you ask a question and you like someone else's question, put the thumbs up, and we will take 2 questions before the break.
Oh, I like Slido.
But I will cut us off at 10:35.
better amplify marginalized voices in our work? Get the mic off. Can we turn? Thanks. All right. So how do we better amplify marginalized voices in our work? So one of the things that I've been paying lots of attention to is the voices that are silent or who's missing, right? So one of the things you have to first do is pay attention, right? So who's at the table, who's not at the table, whose voice has been in and who's not. And we better amplify those marginalized voices when we listen to them. One of the tensions is, and I see this everywhere I go, we told you this last year. We said this is what we need, but you've shown up as if you know better, and you didn't do what we said we needed, and so now you're asking us again. And it might not even be the same person, it's just the same organization. Right? So again, you have to pay attention to, as I said, the past harm, so that you can show up knowing that we've been in this space, we've talked to these folks, we've talked to these communities, and so I don't show up like, hey, I'm the shiny new thing, and this is the first time this question is being asked. This question has been asked of you. Here's what I have that has been shared. Here's what we've done with that. Is there anything we need to do differently? Does that land? Does that land making sense? Okay, next question. We said 2. I struggle with the hustle. Where can I go to learn about the quality over quantity that needs to be done and make the case to my board? That's so good. And so that is a good, I don't have off the top of my head kind of where we can go, but we need to create a culture. So what you're naming in that question is counterculture, right? So the culture says hustle, right? And so sometimes we have to be the pioneers initiating there's lots of good writing about it out there. And so we want to introduce to our boards, to our people, and in our practice, right? And again, when I in sharing this response, folks, I'm not saying it's easy, but it is an opportunity for me to say, if I want to not be in so much of a hustle by this time next year, this is what I'm going to do for the next month. So I have to start to put things into practice. I always say I wish there was a pill. You could just take it and move out, stop hustling, be in the flow. Right? There isn't. We just have to shift our mindsets and get into practice. I think that was 2. I will.
One more question.
Okay.
Given the embedded racism.
Oh yeah, I can do that in a few minutes. What is the role of the church over people to do this work? Yeah. Again, so I go back to that first, what we believe, right? And if you find me behaving in a way that's out of alignment with that belief, then I'd be willing to explore, examine, and engage my behaviors, attitudes, and assumptions with humility and curiosity and a commitment to living into that value. You get that? So how do we, with all of the embedded racism that's there, be willing to listen to folks when they're telling you how it's showing up? Be willing to pay attention to the ways that it is present. I know that I have been one who's been a part of the Christian church all my life. I tell folks, I knew I was Christian before I knew I was black. I think I was born, they took me to church, I found out I was black at church. But this notion of engaging and understanding that the religious institutions that we are so committed to is fraught and mired and embedded in systemic racism. Right? And so for us to be able to peel that onion and pull that back and begin to look at how that shows up requires that we, again, shift our mindsets and recognize the spirit of the divine and our God of our understanding and religion as an institution of oppression. Right? So when I do work around the cycle of oppression, I remember my early years of doing the work, and I could look at government, I could look at education, I could look at healthcare, but when they got to religion, I was like, oh, religion don't have no oppression. Just leave my Jesus alone. And then I had to reconsider. And so that's what we've got to be able to do. Thank you all so much again. It's been an honor and a delight to be with you. I will spend some time this afternoon with some folks, with my colleague, Dr. Becky Martinez, who's here, where we'll get to do a little bit more exploration, go deeper, and really look at some of this. Who am I? Who are we in this class and poverty thing? And so thanks so much for being here, and we hope this was helpful. Thank you.
All right. I'm so glad that we still have a portion of our morning. And this is an exciting panel. We have the opportunity to hear about initiatives that really need your engagement to increase their impact. To lead this conversation, I would like to introduce our moderator, Alami. Hiba, has more of a decade of experience in the nonprofit sector. She currently serves as the Research and Development Director at the League of Women Voters of Indiana. Hiba enjoys giving back to her community and serves in many capacities. One capacity, she serves on the board of directors of the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana. Please help me welcome her this morning.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can you all hear me? Not? Oh, there you go. Well, good morning, all. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. I am honored to be part of this panel discussion that shines a light on coalitions for change, reducing evictions, and advocating for policy change. Before we start, the perfect way to get us started. Before we start, I wonder if you would like to come closer to the stage. If you feel comfortable where you are, that's totally fine. We appreciate you being here today with us. Sure. So this panel discussion brings together representatives of organizations that have been doing impactful work in our communities to end poverty. They have been addressing poverty through tackling mental health, ensuring access to high-quality early childhood education, and housing stability. Here on the stage with me are our stellar panelists, Reverend Josh Riddick, former lead program organizer at the Black Church Coalition at Faith in Indiana. Josh is a dynamic community organizer and justice advocate and with a diverse background. As a pastor, racial equity trainer, and civic dialogue facilitator, he has made significant contributions to the Indianapolis community. Rabbi Aaron Spiegel, Executive Director of the Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance, also known as GIMA. Aaron has founded and directed several organizations focused on helping congregations, nonprofits, and socially minded businesses implement strategic plans for positive social change. And Sam Snideman, Vice President of Government Relations at United Way of Central Indiana. Sam's experience includes roles at the State Department of Workforce Development and Ball State University. He has also contributed to education policy development at the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. Please help me welcome our panelists. Before we dive into the discussion, I would like to remind the audience that we will open the floor for questions by the end of the discussion. So please keep the questions coming and we will address them then. I think Dr. Virginia Kane did a marvelous job setting the stage up for us with some data on the state of poverty in Marion County this morning. She touched upon mental health, and I would like to ask Josh to expand a little bit on that. In what ways can mental health issues exacerbate the challenges of those living in poverty, and how can poverty impact mental health?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First, let me excuse my voice. I have a design flaw where every spring, when my allergies kick in, I lose my voice. I gotta take that up with the divine because I don't know where we went wrong in production. So Dr. Kane gave an incredible, detailed explanation of the data, and I think you all can understand the direct impacts on people living in poverty and on their mental health. I want to frame the question and maybe in a unique way. In our community, we are often inundated with examples and incidents of what I call horizontal violence, gun homicide, domestic violence. And that's violence. That's bad. We have to address that. And we often understand poverty as a root cause of that. But what we miss in the conversation is that the structures that create poverty, which poverty is not an accidental phenomenon, the structures that create that in and of itself are violent. That is structural violence, and we have to name it as such. And we often don't name it as such, so we don't understand it as violence. We don't identify it as violence. And therefore, we don't understand that our state is perpetuating violence on our neighbors and on our communities, in and around our faith communities. The consequence of that is almost that folks who are trapped in economic oppression are in an abusive relationship, sometimes with the state. I grew up in a home with plenty of abuse, and I understand the psychological impact of, man, maybe I did something wrong to get hit today. Maybe I made the mistake that caused that reaction. When in reality, the abusive partner is really to blame. But in those contexts, we internalize the responsibility of harm onto ourselves. So people who are trapped in poverty, financial literacy ain't gonna free you. The giving of the turkeys, as Dr. said, ain't gonna free you. Instead, we have to interrupt, acknowledge, and engage the state where it's participating in implementing violence on our neighbors. So I want to hold that tension today of we are talking about poverty as a form of violence on the people of God. And we have to hold the question of, do we want to accept our resources, our taxes, our politicians participating, enacting, or accepting violence on our people?
Well, out of your observations, Aaron, how does the experiences of being evicted impact an individual or family's stability and well-being?
Am I on? Yes. Josh just said it. It's violence. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't say it better. There was something that Dr. Malat said in his opening about how we dehumanize and keep people in the margins. And Josh just really repeated for me a version of that is our leaders do that whether intentionally or not intentionally. And we have to be the disruptors to change that. I was with somebody yesterday who told me the story of her brother, 35 years old, was evicted. He lives in Fort Wayne. Can't find a job because he's not housed. In Indiana, his chance of finding a place to live are 0 to none. With an eviction on his record, if I weren't in faith company, I would say a bad word. His chances are almost 0. And she told me he's talking about leaving the state. We hear our politicians talk about all this, we don't have enough workers, we need more people in these skilled jobs. Well, we can't house people. And we allow forces not beyond our control, let me take that back, to perpetuate this cycle of evictions in the city, and we turn our workers away. We turn them out of the state. I'm working with a group of students at Notre Dame who are doing a research project on evictions in Indiana, and boy, they're smart. And they named a new moniker I'm going to use, that people are painted with a scarlet E. And it's an epidemic and a crisis in Indiana. So That was an example of an individual. Now multiply that by families, because most people represented in eviction court have at least one child in the household. I'll give one piece of statistic. From a National Institute of Health survey last year, the most common age in America for someone to experience eviction is childhood. I'll say that again. The most common age for someone to experience eviction in America is childhood.
Thank you. Sam, you have been leading policy development on education. Out of your experience, how does early childhood education contribute to breaking the cycle of poverty?
Yeah, I guess I'll take the blame for it. That's a joke. I'm going to make some jokes. I'm going to say some things that sound like they could be funny. If you feel compelled to laugh, do it. I won't take offense even if it's not a joke. The reality in Indiana for a long time, and this has been a problem regardless of party, is that we think that we have lots of really well-intentioned answers to things that we're not addressing, but we're not addressing the sort of core challenge, right? The poverty impacts sort of all of these things, right? It underlies the whole thing. Access to resources, access to supports, meeting basic needs. And early childhood education and child care is a big part of that. It's what we have learned from the pandemic experience. Something that I talk about with legislators every chance I get is that the care economy is what allows every other part of our lives to work. When kids don't have access to high quality and safe places to be, whether those are in homes, whether they are in registered ministries, whether they are in child care centers, schools, when they don't have access to spaces and resources for learning, nobody else can do the things they need to do. Parents can't work, grandparents can't work, businesses can't stay open. All of the things that we take for granted as part of life in society don't happen. And the truth is that goes far beyond the really important benefits that the child receives, right, from access to a high quality educational experience that sets them up with foundational skills that prepare them for K-12 and higher ed and the workforce, right? Those are that's the straightforward answer for how this disrupts sort of generational poverty. But that only happens when we resource appropriately the provider sector and the families who need access to those services so that they can make all the rest of our lives possible.
Well, thank you. Beautifully said about having that access to resources, whether it's educational, whether it's mental health services, any basic needs. And I believe housing is the bedrock of that family stability, that having that access to those resources. And GIMA has been steadfast in its legislative advocacy efforts to address evictions in our state. I
believe that too.
Yeah. And through its court watching program. And I know that you have a lot of data for us to share, Aaron. And I would like you to shed a light on the legislation that GIMA has been advocating for and hopefully working to address eviction rates in Indiana, and if you would like to uplift any other complementary efforts.
Sure. First off, Dr. Washington talked about context. We need context. Everybody says, oh, housing is important, housing is important. Well, It doesn't get much attention outside rooms like this, least of which in our legislature. Housing is health care. Housing is mental health care. Housing is violence. Housing is crime. It is the 2022 FSSA report on the mental health of Indiana said the number one social determinant of adverse mental health was insecure housing. The number one social determinant of health. And then it goes on to say, and we don't know what to do about it. Well, we do know what to do about it. And it's not just evictions. It's lack of affordable housing, and homelessness is at epidemic proportions in Indianapolis. And so at the state level and at the city level, our leaders are not doing anything. So let me start at the state level. You know, GMA, we're a Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance. Our goal is really to improve Indianapolis. But it became very clear, Hiba is one of the ones that convinced me, that if we don't change the laws in Indiana, nothing will happen. I say evictions are a symptom of three things. Lack of affordable housing. We are one of the highest markets in the country for hedge fund investment and rental properties, and our laws. And number 2 and 3 are directly related. I believe in 2022, Indianapolis was number 10 in the country for hedge fund-owned investment properties. I will put money on when the 23 data comes out, we'll be in the top 5, if not the top 3. And that's because institutional investors know they can come into Indiana and act with absolute impunity. As one of the judges said to me a couple years ago, they come to Indiana with evictions as part of their business plan. Because think about it, it's cheaper for them to have attorneys on retainer than to fix the heat or to remediate the mold. So our legislative efforts last year were with Senator Kadura's SB 202, rent escrow. There are 6 states in the country that don't have any provision for tenants to use their rent as leverage to get the heat fixed in December, to get rid of the rats, to remediate the mold. Idaho, Utah, North Dakota, Georgia, North Carolina, Indiana. So SB 202 was to introduce this option, not even rent withholding. My landlord will not fix the heat. I'm going to pay my rent to the clerk of the court to hold it. I'm still paying my rent. Then when the landlord shows that either the repair's been made or in process, landlord, you can have your money. Killed, never got a hearing. Never got a hearing. And I'm one of those people that speaks the truth. The Indiana Apartment Association has absolute authority and power with anything housing related in Indiana. And they absolutely killed it. So we came back this year, 24, this time with a Republican sponsor, Senator Greg Walker from Columbus, God bless him. Absolutely a bipartisan effort and a much better bill this time. Very balanced, very fair to both sides. It didn't get a hearing. It did not get past the committee chair both times, 2 separate committees. We have to ask ourselves why that is. And I also want to tell you, many of you may have gotten the video that we did and the calling campaign. I had people in the Senate offices telling me they've never gotten so much stuff, calls, emails about a bill since they've worked there. And yet, it was killed. So I'm incredibly stubborn. We're coming back. We're working on the next bill next time. But this is not just about legislation, folks. And I'm sorry I'm preaching here. Can't help it. This is about those in power who are disconnected from those who live in the state. This is not an Indianapolis problem. This is a statewide problem. And sorry if I offend somebody here, our mayor is part of the problem. We have a plan to end chronic homelessness in Indianapolis by the end of his last term. He refuses to lead it. We know what works. We have the data. We have the money. But we have to have the city leading that. Absolutely. And we don't have that. We need to make the difference. I'll end.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We heard Dr. Virginia Kane this morning explaining how the inability to pay a utility bill or feeling the risk of being evicted and all other challenges that people in poverty can face on a daily basis and how that affects their mental health. Faith Indiana has celebrated a big win with an unusual coalition of community, business, and law enforcement. They were able to pass legislation that fully funds mental health crisis response in Indiana. Josh, and yes, absolutely, time to celebrate. How does the crisis reform model address the specific needs of individuals experiencing poverty who are at higher risk of mental health crisis?
Yeah, I explain the mechanics of the model. I'll talk about why we even sought this type of model. So the model is pretty simple. And when you're in crisis, you need a place to go that isn't prison or jail. You need a person to call that can actually get you help, and a person to show up. And for us, that orientation to even want to participate in that struggle came from a significant increase, particularly melanated people in our community experiencing mental health crisis and not knowing what to do. He was in the house with auntie and grandma, kids wasn't going to school, and we saw these mental health cases skyrocket on top of inflation and increased poverty. Folks were struggling. And so our orientation to social change is that to contend with a wicked state house, to contend with politicians who don't want to move, you have to build an equal or greater level of power to move them. And our power comes from organized people, money, and votes. And we knew that people who have been impacted, who've been oppressed, want to speak out if given space. And the thing we heard over and over and over again was that I want my family member, I want my loved one to get care. I don't want them to go to prison or jail. I don't want the police to show up. And the police were telling us we don't want to show up. I was like, bet, we can collaborate on that. So we aligned in self-interest around what we wanted, and then we built the people power to go get it done. And ironically, in this state, mental health is for some reason a topic that sits well across bipartisan spaces. And we aligned ourselves with a more conservative senator who was former law enforcement, who saw the impact of locking people up in crisis. Said, you want to write a bill with us? Support the bill. I said, great, let's do it. So we mobilized our people. We controlled a public narrative that said, in our state, people deserve help and not handcuffs. People deserve to get care, not incarceration. And we normalized that sentiment. But not only did we want to normalize that, we also wanted to address the fact that we've spent 40, 50 years being conditioned to call 911, and we're not going to just stop that. So there is another number you can call in 988. That's awesome. But my working class neighbors don't know that. And when they rarely do call the police, they're not because they want the police there. They believe 911 is the police. 911 is the call dispatch center. It's not the same thing, but we've been conditioned to see them as one and the same because we have been encultured to expecting law enforcement to be the only response. So mental health crisis response was a proof of concept, not just to a system, but to our community, that we can build things that are not law enforcement to show up when people need care and need help. And in Marion County, we've done that through the launch of the clinician-led crisis response program. We co-created that with Mayor Hogsett and seen it get funded. It's functioning 24/7 downtown on the East District, and it's responded to 97% of its calls without law enforcement or without arrests. I'll say this and land it, a vast majority of people in crisis are not a danger to other people. They're not a public health or public safety threat. We have been conditioned to expect that, understand that, and participate in seeking a response that demonstrates them as a threat. They're not. And we know that because the people who are in crisis and their family members are the folks that we talk to every day. And we have conversations with in our churches and in the community. And we've seen the tears of when a loved one has a child killed or harmed by the police, who is not a threat, but because of their black body, because of their size, because of their gender, because of their class, position, are perceived as a threat. And so what we have been able to do is create these alternatives. We want to keep building those. And money from the state helps with that. But money from the state also demonstrates that we are allowed to invest in things that are not prisons. And we are allowed to invest in things that aren't putting our folks in cages.
Thank you for that. Ending poverty definitely needs a holistic approach, and it's becoming more evident that there is an interconnectedness between mental health and high quality early childhood education. When we invest in high quality early childhood education, we expect long lasting benefits on the individual's well-being. United Way of Central Indiana has been leading a proactive approach to addressing educational needs in Central Indiana. It has invested in community-based partners and innovative programs that aim to improve educational outcomes for children and adults, underscoring that education is not just about acquiring knowledge, but also providing opportunities for economic advancement and social mobility. Sam, how does the two-generation approach used by United Way benefit families in Central Indiana? And what specific outcomes have been achieved?
Sure, thanks for the question. For those of you who aren't familiar with two-generation approaches, they are sometimes called multi-generation approaches or whole family approaches to supports and resources, right? And so we adopt a two-generation framework to inform all of our impact work and our advocacy work, right? We understand that when you invest in the children inside of a home, you also need to invest in the adults in that home as well. When you invest in the adults in a home, there's almost always something that also needs to be invested in for that child. And so we approach this whole family model in the education space, in the housing space, in addressing basic needs. These are fundamental to the kinds of financial and programmatic investments that we make across Central Indiana. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. Those of you in Marion County, you may be familiar with Centers for Working Families. We operate a number of those sites in collaboration with a number of community centers like Edna Martin and the Bonner Center and others across Marion County. We're working to expand into the other 6 counties in our service area across Central Indiana. Centers for Working Families are premised on the idea that people need sort of a one-stop place to go to get access to the variety of coaching and resources that they need for economic mobility and economic security, right? This is training, this is access to financial coaching, this is access to, in some cases, temporary housing and other kinds of wage supports, right? So these are places where folks can go to get access to the foundational tools they need for growth. And we're seeing some pretty remarkable advancements with our partners in terms of thousands of people being served and seeing increases in their economic stability. I'll also say that at the same time that we're doing this kind of work with Centers for Working Families and Housing, We're also working, as part of a statewide effort, bringing in providers and business owners, academics, people who are families and who are end users of early care and learning, to advocate for expansion of pre-K and child care to families. We worked really closely with legislators this session to adopt Senate Enrolled Act 2, which, among other things, will make every child care worker in Indiana eligible for child care assistance from the state. To Josh's point, demonstrating that we can make investments in people. It's probably not a shock to many of you that child care workers, despite the really, really important work that they do, don't make very much money. It's probably not a shock. And the wage disparities are particularly pronounced for Black and brown women generally who work in those fields, right? The average child care worker in Indiana makes about $12 an hour. The average Black child care worker makes about $10 an hour, right? So it's pretty substantial. And so while our state is often reluctant to do things to support wage increases through minimum wage or other kinds of mechanisms, what we were able to do was functionally provide a wage subsidy to child care workers by taking an expense off their plate so that they can continue to do really important work. This is not to say that's the only thing we need to do. We do need to make improvements in other places to ultimately recognize the interconnectedness of care, economic mobility, housing, health, all of those things being related. We desperately need to invest in systems that benefit people at the end of the day. But it is to say that for as frustrating as my friend Aaron finds the housing conversation, and I share that with him, we are seeing some progress in some other things. And it is about finding that alignment, that sort of mutual self-interest to move things along.
Can I say something? Yeah. Lift that up. How about now? These are systemic issues. You know, we work in the housing space, but really it's all about equity. And we, the three of us, know each other because we all work together, because we're all working on the same thing, different angles. And I want to lift up something else Dr. Washington said. My version of it is, we got to keep working it, even though we don't have a win. I get very frustrated with people that want to help, particularly young folks who want to make a lot of noise and then they don't get a win and they walk away. This has been going on forever. It'll be there when we leave. We can't stop working it. So my example about education was in January. I'm watching the local news. Yes, I do watch the local news. And here was Todd Houston on TV talking about the priority for this year's legislation would be third grade reading skills. And I yelled at the TV, well, that's easy to fix, stop evicting them. Yeah. How can a child learn when they go to 6 different schools in a year? So that's not a housing issue only. That's a systemic, societal problem that we have, and we want the shiny new thing. Oh, let's do this, and that'll fix it all. My dear friend Rodney Stockman from the city gave me my new favorite saying a couple weeks ago. There are no silver bullets, it's all silver buckshot. We have to do all of it. We don't get to do one piece and be done. And that's your work. That's how you can help us.
Thank you, Alami. This is great. I appreciate all the information about the amazing work that your organizations are doing. Before we open the floor for questions, I want to ask you to share with the audience about different ways they can support the work of your organizations. I don't know about you all, but I got inspired and fired up by Dr. Washington. So it's time for calls for action. The question to the three of you, what tangible takeaways or calls for action you would like the audience to leave with today? And we can start with you, Josh.
Not a lot of pressure. So I'll locate myself in the wheel of social change, or the ecosystem of social change. I'm a community-based or structure-based organizer. I want to move people based on their self-interest to build collective power to make a change. That is how I experience the work. That's how I show up. That's what I do. I want everyone to organize. I also realize that's not what everyone wants to do. So my first call to action is locate yourself in the ecosystem. You know, some of the work that I'm hearing Sam do, he's on the inside. He's talking to legislators. He cannot go out in the street and say something about Todd Houston if he's got to go have a meeting with him later. I can. I can, and I do. Our base can, and they do. We got to work together with Sam to help move the ball forward. So there's these ways that you folks got to locate themselves, right? We don't need every politician protesting. We don't need every protester trying to be a politician. And some folks just want to do personal transformation and mentor. Some folks in this room that I know that do incredible mentoring work. Pastor Donnell takes some of the black boys in his community, and he loves on them with a ferocity I don't see from many people in the world. He is doing personal transformation on some young men. Some of those young men need transformation before I can get them in an organizing vehicle, because they're not ready yet. And I can't critique them for not being ready when the system has stripped them of the things to be ready, and Donnell's investing back into them. I therefore can't be mad at Donnell if he ain't coming to the organizing meeting, because he's busy mentoring some young boys. Know the lane you play in the ecosystem. Now, if organizing is the thing that you're called to and you're moved to, here's what I need from you then. Find yourself a power vehicle. That's an organization that's doing grassroots power building. Organize a project called the Black Church Coalition. We build power. Faith in Indiana's in the room. They're a power building vehicle. GMA's in the room. Power building. That's the three best in Marion County doing that work. Locate yourself in a power vehicle where folks are sharing a self-interest, where you are clear about your political stakes in the world. Don't show up because you want to help black people if you're a white person. I love that you have that desire, but I don't need that from you. I need you to be clear about your stakes in the political fight. The State House don't care about you either. They might care about me in a more particular harmful way. They might show that and say that. But they ain't interested if you live or die either, as long as those tax dollars flow back. So what are your stakes in the fight? Because we need you to be clear about those so you can show up fighting for what matters to you and your family. Because I promise you we will align, we'll overlap, and we'll collaborate and build power together.
Thank you.
Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. We are so siloed. Our faith community, our nonprofit community, I don't know why, but stop it. The core of GMA is something we call sacred friendships. We have to know each other. We don't have to agree. We can actually even argue and walk away, shake hands, and my version is, let's go eat. So for us, you can do two very demonstrable things. One, we have something we call sacred friendship conversations. Hiba is one of the facilitators. Every month, we just talk and get to know each other. The second thing is, I didn't start this, I take no credit for it, but I get a lot of credit, and it's not me. There is an eviction court watching program in Marion, Hamilton, and Hendricks County. The court watchers, some of the stalwart court watchers are out in the lobby. Go talk to them. We know we have a very messed up court system here. There are 9 judges in Marion County, and they're all, as they would say, live in their own fiefdoms. What happens in eviction court is very inconsistent, and we know, as my friend Frank Quigley says, the scariest thing to a judge is a church lady with a clipboard. Their presence in court is changing the way judges are acting. And now we're actually collecting data about what happens in court. We're collecting data. I will tell you, there's like 2 other places in the country that actually have data about what it was the tenant represented? Were they allowed to speak? Was there habitability issues? Were there children involved? Courts don't track this, but now we have a story about what's happening in our courts. And I hope, God willing, we'll be able to use that information as we go talk to legislators this year. So you can do that. We have a website now where you can sign up for court, you can enter your data, go talk to the court watchers.
Okay.
So, you know, I have a brand team that will make me say this. Go to our website, uwci.org. We got stuff about how to get our calls to action and participate in the coalitions that we convene and things like that. And all of that's great. All of that's really important. I love having other people with us in that. I look at advocacy work as a we over me endeavor. I am the least important person in every single one of those conversations because I am, despite the position that I have, right, I'm still the son of a Waffle House waitress who tried to raise 4 kids on $2.15 an hour plus tips, right? And that's always the way I'm going to see myself, no matter what I do, no matter what sort of access I have to people. The humility of my circumstance requires me, and the calling that I feel in my religious life compels me to see myself, to lower myself, to empty myself for other people. And so what I want to say as an action item that is very nebulous, but also incredibly specific to your circumstance, is let yourself be emptied of yourself to enter into these spaces and these conversations. Let the Spirit move you, right? Let the sort of, I recently came back from a silent retreat at Our Lady of Gethsemane Abbey in Kentucky, which is home to one of my very favorite authors, Thomas Merton. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Merton, but I had a lot of opportunity to read recently, and I read a book by Henri Nouwen called The Wounded Healer. It's about ministry, right? It's about using your own brokenness, your own human frailty, to come into relationship with other people, right? And I think that's, even though it's not as concrete a thing as maybe Lindsay had hoped for. Sorry, Lindsay, wherever you are. That is the ultimate action item, I hope that all of us take away from this entire day, is let yourself be broken, but let that brokenness be a way to relate to the people around you. To not want to do things just because you feel bad, or just because you think it would be good to help people of color and people in poverty, right? Don't do it for your psychological benefit. Do it because you're broken and because you need that too. And that's the way you get to a place where you're all whole, where we're all one, right? That's the action item from me.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to open the floor for questions. As you can see on the screen, the questions started coming. Keep them flowing. I can see that the first question got the most likes. Let's not have a meeting later. Speaks to Dr. Washington's comment. What needs to happen for a collective shift of story narrative change now? If we keep saying it will be around forever, it will. Any takers?
I am deeply fatalistic, right? I will just admit, I will admit my own sort of that there is an element that building something as a religious person, right? Building the kingdom of God is not something that's ever done, right? It is constantly a process. There's always a perfection and perfectibility that occurs. And policy, the work that we all do, these are ultimately a series of choices, but none of the things that we do, none of the programs that we implement, none of the documents that we write are meant to last forever. No matter what anyone will tell you, no matter what people will tell you about the Constitution, it's been amended. No matter what people will tell you about any particular right or rule or policy in any society, it's not meant to last forever. We have to be willing to accept that forever means that there's always a new challenge on the horizon that needs to be addressed. Whether it looks the same or is different is the context, right? As Dr. Washington said. We have to accept the heaviness and the weight that forever means not the same, different, but still work to do.
I don't really want to answer this. The question is, what needs to happen for a collective shift of story narrative? I'm a broken record. It's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. And I will say, my world is the multi-faith, interfaith world. We don't have those relationships here. We don't. We think we do. My first question is, I have Muslim friends. When was the last time they came to your house? I have black friends. Do you go out and eat together? We have to know each other, and we don't. As long as we don't know each other, we'll work in silos. This is very pie in the sky for me, but the organizing that Josh does works because people have relationships with each other. But we don't have relationships with them. So we're not helping him, and we need to help him because he's doing the organizing. So, relationships.
So I'll share a quote from one of Faith in Indiana's pastors who organizes with organizer Bailey Schwartz. You in here, Bailey? She's somewhere around here. So one of her pastors, Pastor Bo, shared in a meeting once, and this is an absolute bar to me. We do a lot of things that are cathartic but not strategic. So they feel good, but they don't actually affect change. You know, in defense of the young people you're referencing earlier, I'm a young millennial, and I have watched most of my life the lack of effective strategy to move social change forward in the public arena. So then I get upset when I show up somewhere. So organizing has been a gift to me, a life-saving thing to me, because I was able to see effective strategy play out and not just do things out of catharsis. And what we've experienced the last 4 years, people want catharsis. People need catharsis, and they need that, right? Going out in the streets and breaking a window was cathartic. It was not a riot. Going out and yelling at the police was cathartic. When you go back and look at who manifested in those protests, people couldn't stand the president. People hated being in the house. People were losing loved ones. They were losing jobs. And they were watching people get killed on video. They needed a place to release. We didn't do a lot of strategy in that season, right? The outcomes in most major U.S. cities was an increase in the police budget, and everybody's mayor let them go paint in the street for a minute. In Indianapolis, organizing was at work, and we changed the General Orders Board to give civilian control of a good deal of police policy, which we've been using as an organizing vehicle to affect change. Is it enough? Absolutely not. But was it strategic in a moment where there was chaos? Yes. So I think that's significant. And I'll say this last thing, I'll be remiss as a practicing theologian and not name this. I identify as a Christian, and so I understand the story of Jesus as one who, at the end of his earthly ministry, confronts the state and confronts empire and is murdered for it. And so when we talk about how do we actually affect change, it'll be around forever. Jesus was not afraid to confront a state that was self-interested in killing him. But the same coin of that tradition says that despite the attempts of the state to rob life, God poured life back in, and the state actually is not a God and cannot stop the movement going forward. So while we may lose our leaders and have them assassinated, arrested, incarcerated, change can still happen because the Spirit of God is still at work. And so I don't hold out to hope for some, finite future that I'm going to see in my lifetime. I wrestle with the tension that the person that I'm called to follow was murdered by standing up for those of the oppressed, for the melanated, marginalized, and oppressed people of the world. And so if I'm going to actually do that, I can't be afraid of the confrontations with the state to get there. And we can't be afraid of confrontations with the state to get there, recognizing a greater power is at play that can overcome the acts of violence from the state.
Well, we have a question about housing, but I want to invite the other two panelists to weigh on it if needed. How can we increase housing opportunities for justice-involved citizens with a felony conviction?
I mean, I'll do the easiest one. Go ahead. Build more. Build more housing of all kinds, right? The reality in our state is that we have an opportunity to do a lot if we would just open the wallet a little bit, right? And it's as true for every policy domain as there is. Spend more money, but spend it in smarter ways toward the goals that you actually have, not the ones that you say you have, right? And in housing, build more. Not just things that are good at a $1,600 a month price point. Not just a $500,000 house, right? Build all kinds of stuff and build it everywhere, right? Yeah, and not just affordable housing, accessible housing, safe housing, transitional housing, workforce housing, so that it's close to places where people actually work, so they don't have to drive an hour, right? Build it, and build it in places where people actually want to be. So it's not a secret, but from the educational perspective, since I'm apparently the education person, rich people always had education choice. Because they could move to wherever they want that had a good school, right? And then they didn't build places where other people could get to them to protect those environments, right? Build housing wherever people want to be, and build it in abundance so that people can afford it.
That's the easy solution.
Yeah.
The systemic answer is stop having so many people involved in the justice system. I don't have a good answer to that because, I want to take the long view that we will work towards a solution, but short term, people are unhoused today. Today, this week in Marion County, 500 people will be evicted, 500 families. We average 500 a week. We are, in Marion County only, 30,000 units short for the lowest income folks. They have nowhere to go. That's just to reach parity. That's not low income and low middle income. I don't think we can build our way out of this problem soon. The people most affected by the evictions or the housing system are those coming out of incarceration. I had a conversation with a man who had both a felony record and had been evicted. And I won't tell you what we talked about, how we talked, but he can't live in Indiana. He will never find a place to live on his own. So the strategic change would be to stop painting those people with those scarlet E's and those now scarlet J's. Stop incarcerating people for mental health issues and for minor infractions, because it has a permanent, long-term impact on their lives. And it's not just them. It impacts my life too. It impacts all of us. Somebody told me last week, oh, you speak Republican really well. There is an economic impact every time somebody gets out of prison and can't find a place to live. Every time. We're paying for it. Besides the fact that it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Well, I appreciate you all being here today. We've come to the end of this panel discussion. I appreciate the question and the engagement, and it's such an honor to be here with you today and with our stellar panelists. Please give it to them. Well, many wishes for a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.